The courtroom was so still, you could hear the ceiling fan creak above the judge's head. The boy standing before the bench looked impossibly small in his orange jumpsuit, 17 years old, wrists chained, eyes hollow. His name was Isaiah Cole, and in less than 5 minutes, a single man would decide if he lived or died. Judge Raymond Clark adjusted his glasses, his lips curling slightly as he stared down at the boy. "This court finds the defendant guilty of first-degree murder," he said, voice sharp and cold. "Sentencing is death." Gasps filled the room. The boy's mother screamed. Isaiah didn't even flinch, just whispered, "But I didn't do it." Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're re-watching from. I love knowing who's listening. The gavel slammed down. Sound echoed through the chamber like the end of hope. For years, people in that small southern town had whispered about Judge Clark, the kind of man who saw justice in colors. His verdicts were predictable, his prejudice polished behind a robe and title. And Isaiah's trial was never meant to be fair. There had been no fingerprints, no witnesses. Just a wallet found near the crime scene, and Isaiah's name scribbled inside. The defense attorney had tried to argue it was planted, but the judge barely let her finish. As guards dragged Isaiah away, his mother Lorna clung to the railing. "Please, he's just a boy. He didn't kill anyone." Judge Clark looked at her without expression. "Then may God have mercy on his soul," he said, before standing and leaving the courtroom. But mercy, it turned out, was already moving. 3 weeks later, the courthouse buzzed again, not with another trial, but with breaking news. A confession. A man named Tyler Briggs, a known gang member, had been arrested in another state and under interrogation, confessed to the same murder Isaiah was sentenced for. His fingerprints matched. The murder weapon had his DNA. Isaiah's supposed wallet was part of a setup. The real killer had stolen it days before the crime. The story spread like wildfire. Reporters swarmed the courthouse. Protesters filled the steps with signs reading "Free Isaiah" and "Justice for the Innocent." But inside his home office, Judge Clark sat frozen before his TV, watching his own face flash across the screen. "Racist sentencing," the headline read. His phone rang non-stop, reporters, lawyers, his own clerk. He ignored them all, because deep down he already knew he'd destroyed an innocent life. At dawn, Lorna stood outside the prison gates, clutching her son's photo. She'd been there every day, waiting for the chance to see him, even through glass, even in silence. But that morning an officer approached her with trembling hands. "Mrs. Cole, he's being released." She fell to her knees, sobbing. The ground beneath her felt like it was spinning. When Isaiah walked out hours later, the chains gone from his wrists, his steps were slow and uncertain. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But all he saw was his mother running toward him, arms wide, tears streaming down her face. "Ma," he whispered as she wrapped him in her arms. They finally believed me. The crowd around them broke into applause. Even the guards watching couldn't help but smile. But not everyone was smiling. Judge Clark, pale and silent, walked into his chambers that same afternoon. He found his desk piled with letters, some hateful, some hopeful, all demanding accountability. And right in the center of that pile was a sealed envelope with no return address. He opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note. "You didn't just sentence my son, Judge. You sentenced your own soul. But grace is still possible if you have the courage to earn it." It was signed, Lorna Cole. That night, the judge didn't sleep. He replayed the trial in his mind, the way he'd cut off the defense, the smirk he'd given when the boy cried, the quiet satisfaction he'd felt when the verdict was read. He saw it all now for what it was, not justice, but ego, not law, but hate. The next morning, the courthouse overflowed again. This time, not for Isaiah's case, but for an emergency hearing Judge Clark himself had requested. Cameras rolled as he entered, robe perfectly pressed, expression unreadable. But when he spoke, his voice trembled. "I made a mistake," he began. "A grave one. I let prejudice blind me to truth. And an innocent boy nearly paid with his life." The room was dead silent. "I hereby vacate my own ruling. And I resign, effective immediately." Gasps erupted, followed by a slow, hesitant clap, one that grew louder, spreading across the entire courtroom. For the first time in his career, Judge Clark stood there not as a man of authority, but as a man of remorse. Later, outside the courthouse, Isaiah and his mother stood watching the news cameras pack away. "Do you think he meant it, Ma?" Isaiah asked quietly. Lorna took his hand. "Maybe. But forgiveness isn't about him. It's about setting us free." Isaiah looked up at the morning sky, the same one he'd barely seen behind prison bars, and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, it didn't feel heavy, because kindness doesn't vanish. It waits, and it finds its way back. Sometimes it walks right back into the same courtroom that once took everything away. Moral truth. True justice isn't about power. It's about humility, courage, and the strength to make things right when you've been wrong. Poetic reflection. The same gavel that condemned him once echoed again, not in judgment this time, but in redemption. Metro CTR line. If you believe justice should never depend on race or power, share this story and subscribe for more emotional tales that remind us what humanity truly means.